Hey Zhizhang, written impromptu on returning home. As a young boy, I left home. I return an old man. My accent is still the same, but my temple hair is grey. The children see me, but don't know who I am. Laughing, they say, "Stranger, where are you from?" So we start a new section. There's two left in this collection. This time we're moving on to the 7-word quatrains. So nothing especially interesting to say about the 7-word quatrain that we didn't say already about the 5-word quatrain. 7 words allows for 2 more syllables per line, which allows one would think, a slightly greater degree of expression. But the fact that those extra words have to be in each of the lines and not forming new lines generally means, I think, for the Chinese poet, more than an extension of what is being said, a greater use of images or similes per line, also a greater difficulty. This was even more evident perhaps in the heptasyllabic Liu Xi, the regulated poem. It was famously a very difficult art form because, especially in the couplets that require perfect parallelism, 7 characters imply another 7 characters that have to be completely parallel to the first ones, whether it is in a generally a contrastive parallelism, but where the same type of word has to go with the same type of word. Du Fu was famous for being very proficient at this. And I imagine the same sort of difficulty applies in part to the quatrains, although I'm not sure what the requirements for strict parallelism are in them. In fact, from the translation of this one, for example, there doesn't seem to be any strict parallelism being employed in any of the 2 couplets. Anyway, this section is relatively big. I'm giving it a quick look now to see who is the best represented poem here. That is to say, who has the most poems. And, I'm seeing Shang Hu has 1, 2, 3, 4 poems. So he's probably the most prolific writer. Du Mu, yeah. We will talk about him later, but Du Mu was famous in this art form. He was one of the important late Tang poets, especially known for his quatrains. I think he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And Li Shangjing also has quite a few from what I see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Anyway, let's go back to the first one. So we've just read He Zhizhang's written impromptu on returning home. This is the only poem in the collection by He Zhizhang. So let's learn a few things about him. So basically what we can say is that he was a poet from the transition between the early Tang period and the High Tang period and the Xuanzong. So he was born in 659 in Yongxing in Zhuizhou. He was well known as a young man for his poetry, and he passed the examination for presented scholar in 695, being appointed an erudite of the School of the Four Gates, later an erudite of the Court of Imperial Sacrifices. So he started his service under Empress Wu Zetian, but continued under the next emperors of the restored Tang dynasty. And he also benefited from the patronage of Chang Jue, who was a patron of different literati, including Zhang Jiuling in this anthology, and a great politician, and apparently a quite decent enough poet himself. Although I think he has no poems included in this anthology, by the way. Anyway, going back to He Zhizhang, he managed to get some mid-high level positions thanks to this patronage, like member of the Academy of Scholarly Worthies, Vice Minister of Rights, Director of the Palace Library. He retired in 744 after more than 5 decades in service. So when he was pensioned, he was a very ripe old man. And precisely that retirement is the one that connects him to the poem we have read today. Because he went home wanting to become a Taoist priest, but died in the same year. He was also famous for having befriended younger poets during his lifetime, like Li Bai and Du Fu, and for being very fond of drinking. and is included sometimes in the lists of the 18 mortals of the wine cup, and he also had a good reputation as a calligrapher. So we can see he is quite a person, even though it seems the anthologist of this selection didn't decide to include many works by him. So the topic of this poem is returning home. Very typically for a poet who initiated his career during the early Tang poet. This is an impromptu poem, and these improvisations were especially typical of the early Tang poetry, although as we know from what I've said, he wrote this poem in 744, so well into the High Tang period. And it's an improvisation. It's part of a set of two, only one of which is being included here. So the topic is going home, traveling, you could say, but the focus of the poem is not only in returning, but on the passage of time. The poet has been working all his life as a scholar official at the imperial court, and now that he is old, decrepit, and as we know, and as he might have suspected, about to die, he returns home to a place that, even though it's his home and has his family roots and his home, presumably, and other sorts of connections, can no longer be really called home after more than, as we say, 5 decades away from it, with probably only sporadic visits. So, this reminds me, even though it might be a frivolous connection, the return of Frodo to the Shire at the end of The Lord of the Rings. It's this idea that once one has been through certain things, and especially after a certain time, home in a way stops being home. One becomes a liminal figure that no longer really belongs anywhere, not in one's home place, because one has been so away that he has no living connections, perhaps with the people, and no real roots there. But also one is no longer part of the place where he might have gone to live and to work, and one was always feeling a foreigner there. Anyway, these feelings of rootedness, perhaps a bit old-fashioned or more proper of a period that is not our postmodern cosmopolitan age in which people are continually on the move. Anyway, for the Chinese, as you know, by convention, traveling and getting old, well, the getting old part would be universal, are very sad topics. So this poem has a very bittersweet, or not sweet, very bitter, melancholy tone. You could say bittersweet, perhaps, because I imagine the poetic persona is glad of being home, and of even though he is old and probably weak and partially ill, of having finally gotten rid of all the chores and obligations, and being a pensioner with the few positive aspects and benefits that retirement might bring. So the poem is really just a reflection about that. It feels pretty prosaic in the translation. I don't know in the original, but it's it's just the poet saying, I was away all my life working, and now I come back. I'm old, and people don't recognize me, even though I might have some local traits. The young people ask me where I'm from. They perceive me as a foreigner because, they know I'm not a person of the village. They've never known me in the maybe 10 or 15 years in which those children might have been alive. Okay, let's just take a little look at the couplets. First couplet. As a young boy, I left home. I return an old man. My accent is still the same, but my temple hair is grey. So one interesting thing here is that the parallelism, the contrastive parallelism, seems to be taking place within the line more than between the lines. So in the first line, young boy left home, old man return. And the second one, accent same, hair different, or say hair grey. So the parallelism seems to be taking place, as I said, more inside the same line than between couplets, which makes sense. With 7 characters, you can very easily do this. Put a verb in the middle and divide. Not put a verb in the middle, put a comma in the middle and really divide it into 2 short sentences of 3, 4 characters each. So the idea is this contrasting between the root and the present. So young man living here, old man coming back. Accent being the same, but aspect not being the same. This is a very poetic topic, like Some things don't change. The exterior world, maybe, so the village is still there. The houses are basically still there. His home is still there. But the person who returns is no longer the same person because he is old. Time has passed through him. So yeah, he might have the accent. Even at this time of Chinese history, there probably was a big abyss between the local languages, which are the root, the origin of the current languages in China, most of which are not mutually intercomprehensive, and the language of poetry and the scholar official. So he still speaks the local dialect, but he's this old man who has been away for a long time. So nature is cyclical, and physical spaces, mountains, towns are long-lasting, but men are not so long-lasting. They change in a relatively short amount of time compared with nature, or even with long socially stable institutions like towns or villages. So this was the first couplet, really introduces the topic, and the second couplet gives us an anecdote that exemplifies this divide, this divorce between the man who was from here but no longer is, the old man who comes back. The children see me, but don't know who I am. Laughing, they say, "Stranger, where are you from?" So the anecdote with the children exemplifies what the first couplet presents as more of a metaphysical or subjective reflection on the part of the poem. The second couplet would, in this case, be a social instantiation of what the poet was thinking in the first couplet. People here, the children especially because they're young, don't recognize me, and they ask me where I am from. They perceive me as a foreigner. So, yeah, pretty straightforward poem, and but interesting in many aspects as the beginning of this section.